going to give us a shelter with a little bit of a buffer time, which we might use or not, as we heard from staff. But the commitment is the same. The shelter will be open until we have this George Street revitalization done, which the earliest is 2025.
Thanks, Councillor Butler. Other speakers? Okay, well, I will speak now then. I'm very disappointed that this discussion is taking place, because I don't think we're being honest about what's really on the table here. Deputy Mayor, with respect, you're a lawyer. An option that exists in the lease is an option at our option. It's for us. If we choose not to exercise it, then it won't be exercised. The lease will be 10 years, and I then associate myself completely with the comments of Councillor Barlow. It's a 10-year lease, which gives us the period of time that was contemplated, which is the opening of George Street, plus a buffer, which I think we'd all agree would be wise in the circumstances. And then it provides for 2 options at our option if we wish to exercise them later on. But let's talk about the real issue here, because really, by sending this lease back, probably we're going to put this arrangement that has been years in the making in peril. And I think that's really what the idea is here. And you talk about the work the councillor did, and I'll give her full marks for that. And she's been a very loyal supporter of mine on many, many things. But I also went out to that ward twice as the mayor of the city to help to talk to the residents and help with the negotiation with staff of these things, because the fact of the matter is we just don't need this shelter. We need, I think, 10 more after this. And if this gets turned around and doesn't get put in, we'll have trouble locating another shelter anywhere else in the city, because every other member of council and other people from residents associations will be empowered by this to believe that if you just push back hard enough and long enough, and if the councillor just does what I understand, I have to get elected by the very same people, And I'll go back out there again. I've been twice, and if you want me to go to a larger public meeting and explain to people, as I have to explain, I'm the one, more so than anybody else in this room, when people are homeless in this city, has to answer for it. And I'm not going to answer by saying, well, I'm terribly sorry, we just couldn't find anywhere to put a shelter because people kept pushing back. Our conscience as members of this city council, as people elected to come here and deal with these issues and deal with the problems of our most vulnerable people, should be what's on our mind now. And I have here, I got it, thank the clerk could fortunately print it off, 4 pages, in some cases of unprecedented improvements or things that were done to make this shelter more acceptable to this community, and to make it to the point where when our officials, I don't want to put words in their mouth, when they were out there the last time we were out there a week or so ago, they said it was unprecedented in terms of the kind of place this would be, the number of services that would be offered to people in this building. They'll be among the best cared for people in the entire city. But the question we really have to ask ourselves is, if we send it back, and if we then have this end up, you know, on the cutting room floor, as it were, because the landlord just says, forget it, you know, the deal was the deal, then I'll be looking to people here for where it is we're going to house these people who are homeless in our city. And anybody who wants to sort of take issue with whether or not there's a homelessness problem in the city, then you know there is. And come with me. Come with me. I went this winter to many of these shelters. I went and talked to people on the street. You see how the accountability that I'm held to for this problem. I, as the mayor, who am just a member of council, just like you, and who has to get elected among exactly the same people you represent. So I think it's a very important decision time just now. And it's an important decision time for about 10 more of these we have to find in the next period of time. And I'm going to stand up and be counted on this by saying no to the motion moved by Councillor Palacio. I'm going to say no because, frankly, those options are there for our benefit. If we don't wish to exercise them, then we don't have to. We can just say no, this shelter's done, George Street is about to open any day, and it's over. We have that option. Taking the options away is simply meant to start a renegotiation with the landlord over again. I think if people really wanted to speak up, they'd say with the hopes that those negotiations will fail and the shelter won't go there. And I'm not part of that. I went out there twice to avoid precisely this kind of moment from being in front of us. And my conscience is clear voting for this.
Point of privilege, Mr. Mayor. I want to be very clear with you and everybody else, is that we are not against shelters in any way whatsoever. I do have shelters in my area, is the way it was done and how the community has been, through a number of communications, misled. And that's where I have an issue overall. It's not the shelter itself.
I think, I will just say, I've taken more than my time. I will just say, I think the beginning part of this consultation with the public was very poorly handled. And I think if we'd gone at it this way from the beginning, the result would have been different in terms of the feelings of the community. But we are where we are. So, anyway, let's, I think if we've...
Can I ask you a question? I know you didn't move a motion, so you convinced me that I'm happy to vote for it. But the fact that you said that we need 10 more of these, and that we already have this set up, and that we have these extensions in place, it seems to me that we're left with no other choice. If we need 10 of them, this is going to become a permanent shelter. I mean, there is some logic, you got to accept the logic that if there's something there and you have, you know, let's say 10 years from now, the problem isn't going to get any better, likely. It's probably only going to get worse. That, you know, at the end, we'll extend for the option because we will need a homeless shelter, and this, and you
My
know,
understanding
we're
is,
heading on a track that this is
staff
going
will
to be
correct me if
permanent.
I'm wrong. It's
And
not-
if that's the case, why don't we
But
just
I think
say
that the 10 more we need or whatever are meant to look after our needs in the short term until George Street and other things are done, so that a lot of these are temporary. While we refurbish or, well, there's 4, okay, I exaggerated. I think we originally needed 15, and we've now obviously got 5 or 6 that are done. So we need 4 more. 4 temporary. Okay.
But recognizing that, Mr. Mayor, you can appreciate the suspicion that the community has that this is going to be permanent, that this potentially could be permanent.
Well, but you've heard our staff. This is why I don't like having people say our staff are misleading people. You've heard them say this one. We're only talking about this one tonight, and it's one of the temporary ones. And they're saying it's temporary. When George Street is done, this will close or be repurposed if we still have the lease in place.
Right, but you can appreciate the community.
Yes. And is our job to fuel that suspicion or to try and dampen it down?
Can I just, I know it's out of order, but I'd just like to make a comment to members of council, and I really don't appreciate some members of council thinking that I don't support a shelter. I support the shelter. I didn't support the location at first, but I negotiated with my community and we got 50 rather than 100. It's the way we communicated to the community. It's wrong. And if it was your community, you would be just as upset as I am, Councillor Bylaw, Councillor McMahon. If you say something to your community and then you retract it, then you have to justify that. And that's wrong. That's what's wrong about this whole process.
Mayor Tory? I'm over here and I haven't had my warm milk yet. Would it be beneficial to add with the recommendation to council, if it goes forward, that prior to any lease extension, local councillor be contacted well in advance of that going forward to provide some understanding to their community if it was going to be extended for more than the original 10 years? I'm wondering on your thought. It's a 10-year lease, and there's options, which staff will only need, they've said, if they're unable to complete George Street in time. So I'm wondering if the recommendation to council is to enact the 10-year lease, but come back to council prior to any extensions as an option. And that might provide to the local councillor some surety that it won't automatically become a 20-year shelter without council approval.
We're into an unorthodox zone here in terms of out of the procedural order, so.
In terms of the real estate transaction, normally we would look and see if it falls under delegated authority for staff to just go ahead and renew through the options. But if committee wants us to come back to council, I don't see any harm in doing that at the 10-year mark. Because all we're doing is informing the committee about the circumstances at the time and having committee help us decide, are we going to exercise the option or not? So I don't see any harm in that.
Is somebody preparing something now?
So being totally unorthodox, if I could have a moment to speak?
Yeah, you hadn't spoken yet, had you?
No. So in listening to the issues that have transpired, and I'm one that's supportive of shelters. As you know, I've served on the board of youth shelter and had them built in numerous places around the city. If the community was told that it was for a 5-year period or a temporary use while George Street was being rebuilt, the only thing and I wasn't there to say that, but it appears to me that's what staff have negotiated is a 10-year lease with that intention, then my motion would seek council's concurrence prior to the extension of the lease and not make it delegated authority. And then if the shelter has or needs to continue to operate, council can then take advantage of the extension, but then still fulfill the commitments that my colleague has stated were given to the community, that it would be a 5-year or a temporary shelter. And I think that if it has worked well, then there wouldn't be a problem and it was needed with an extension. And that's my experience with the shelters that are up in, like for example, the youth shelter that's up in North York that came in many years ago. The residents thought that having a youth shelter was going to increase the number of break-ins and burglaries and the problem in the area, and instead the residents were brought onto the advisory committee and became full supporters of the shelter and the work that it did. So it's never been a problem, nor have the other locations that we've put them into. So I would place the motion just to seek the council authority prior to extending the lease.
Okay, any questions of the mover?
Well, I'm just wondering if this is going to be the new norm, that we're going to do this on every temporary shelter.
So,
Because I think that we're strangleholding
so
the process.
I think you've answered the question yourself, Councillor McMahon. If it's a temporary shelter, it's not necessarily there for 20 years without council authorizing it to be there longer than that. However, my own experience is that the shelters moving into an area become good community neighbors and people actually support them and they belong and work with the people that are running them. I haven't had a lot of complaints that I've heard of with the shelters I'm involved in where they would want to have them taken out. It's just the opposite. They support them and go to their fundraising events and are great community, participants. But if it's not a new norm if it's a temporary shelter. To say 10 years is temporary and the extension, just get council's concurrence.
All right, so we have some motions to deal with here. All right, yes, go ahead, Frank. Is this a question of the mover?
So, Councillor Shiner, given that the councillor, when something is coming up for renewal, the lease is coming up for renewal, the councillor could intervene at that time and do exactly what you're suggesting council do. So why would you want to, why don't you just leave it in the local councillor's hands?
Staff have said it would never come back. It will be delegated authority. Currently as it stands, council does not get involved in any way, nor are the councillor asked or the community asked about exercising the extensions. And as staff have said, if council want an input to that, then they would understand that and come back at the time of the extension.
Right, but you know that delegated authority can be withdrawn at any time. All the local councillor has to do is bring it to the attention of council.
Oh, no, I don't.
Well, council can...
No, that would be a major thing to have to bring up in 6 or 7 years' time, an issue about delegated authority and try and explain what happened that long ago. I'm simply putting it forward for you as members of committee, whether you wish or you don't wish, to support it.
I think the services will be in place. Okay, leave it at that for.
So we're ready to call the question on these motions then? In what order will we do it?